So let's talk a little bit now about one of the things that many women, every single woman will have to go through, and many women are really troubled by and confused by, and that is the period of time of menopause. And so here's the thing that women need to understand with menopause. Once you cross the menopause period and your estrogen and progesterone levels begin to fall, that changes the way your metabolism behaves. And so I want to review a couple key concepts here that you need to understand that are going to be insightful for you so you can understand why your body worked the way it did maybe when you were younger and how it's going to change now that you're in menopause or when you do go through menopause. The first thing you need to understand is this whole idea of calories versus carbohydrates. Okay? So calories versus carbohydrates. This is a key argument in the world of weight loss and fat loss because many people say that it's calories that matter most and carbohydrates don't. Other people say carbohydrates matter more than calories. But here's the interesting thing about this is that in a sense, a low-calorie diet is also a low-carbohydrate diet. And I want to explain that because this is key to understanding how this works. So let's say when you're young, you're able to go on Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig or something like that, which is essentially a low-calorie diet. So what are you going to do when you go on a low-calorie diet? You're going to cut out a couple things. You're going to cut out all fat, right, because fat has the highest amount of calories, and you're going to cut out a ton of simple sugars, right? No one on a diet does candies and soda pops and things like that. And you're going to probably increase your fruits and vegetables a little bit as well. That's kind of what the standard is. You might move from refined grains like things like Fruit Loops and things like that to more whole grains. And so essentially what that all accomplishes is decreased calories. The other thing that it accomplishes though is it accomplishes something that is very key here, and it accomplishes also a lower carbohydrate diet than what you were eating previously, just because you have certainly cut out all the refined sugars, which are going to be a reduction in your total carbohydrates, aren't they? So not only did you lower calories, but you also lowered carbohydrates. And the other thing that you did is you lowered the influence of the most negative and insidious insult on fat loss, which is you lowered the fat and carb intake together. Because you're not going to be eating bagels and cream cheese or pastries and things like that that have this negative fat, starch, fat, sugar combination, which is really bad for fat loss, probably the worst thing for fat loss. So that's really interesting, isn't it? So essentially what you were doing when you were going on Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and these programs is you were lowering calories, yes, but you were also lowering carbs. And that is why you were able to get the results that you may have gotten then. Now you may have noticed, or you will notice, when you go through menopause, now what happens is you are no longer able to get the same result from these low-calorie programs like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and things like that. And the reason why is because one of the major influences on whether you can burn fat or not is carbohydrate and insulin. And while when you were younger, this low-calorie diet may have lowered carbohydrates enough for you to see results, now that you have decreased estrogen levels, which make you, estrogen, remember, makes you more insulin sensitive or less carbohydrate reactive. Now that insulin is gone, these carbohydrate amount that once was able to help you lose fat is now not enough, and you will need to lower it further. So you'll have to go down in carbs even more. So the point here is at menopause, whereas a low-calorie diet was low carbohydrate enough to get results when you were young and had estrogen working for you, now it will not be, and you'll have to go from a calorie counting approach to a lower carbohydrate approach. And that is one very key thing to understand about what happens in menopause. Many women do not understand this key issue, and also don't understand that it's not just simple carbohydrates like cookies and candies and pastries and crackers and things like that that make a difference now. Now you're going to have to watch all the healthy stuff, the whole grains, even some fruits, and even some foods like dairy that stimulate insulin as well, because estrogen is not there. And so you have to go from this whole idea of what was once healthy, whole grains and dairy foods and fruits and things like that, to something that is still healthy but more fat loss, which is more vegetable and protein based. This is one of the key concepts that you need to understand to master and really kind of understand what you're going to need to do through menopause. Another key thing you need to understand that happens with menopause is that the estrogen and progesterone ratio changes fairly significantly. So I want to sketch this out for you so you could see. So here's estrogen and here is progesterone, okay? And what happens is, let's first sketch out what happens when you are a young woman and have these hormones working for you. Here's estrogen, and then here is the progesterone level. But what happens at menopause is that the ovaries stop producing estrogen and progesterone, and so what happens is estrogen falls pretty significantly, right? And progesterone falls as well. But the spread between estrogen and progesterone gets much bigger. In other words, whereas during menopause you may have had something that looks like, or during your younger years you had something that looks like that, during menopause now you have something that looks more like that. So in other words, not only do you have low estrogen and progesterone from a total perspective, but you have a relative estrogen excess compared to progesterone at menopause. And that's an important concept to understand. So then what does that mean? One of the things happens is now we know we have lower estrogen levels at menopause. And we also know that estrogen is sort of anti-carb or anti-insulin. In other words, it helps us be more insulin sensitive and more or less rather carb reactive. And so when you have enough estrogen, you can handle carbs better and you can handle insulin better. Estrogen is also anti-stress or anti-cortisol. And so when you have plenty of estrogen, you can handle stress better. And we know that stress also has a negative impact on insulin. So as estrogen goes away or you have lower amounts, now you're going to be more carb reactive, have more insulin and more cortisol effects, which are all going to lead to having an issue of weight gain around the middle. So you might say, okay, so what happens then with progesterone? Well, progesterone is interesting here because progesterone has the same impact that estrogen has on cortisol. It is an anti-cortisol agent, but when it's gone through menopause, you end up having positive cortisol effects. Now, here's the tricky thing that happens with menopause that I want to show you. Estrogen levels fall because the ovaries are no longer making estrogen anymore. However, you can still make estrogen in several places. Your fat cells make estrogen. You can get estrogen-like compounds in the diet through plastics that you store your food in, through pesticides, through coffee. In other words, there are a ton of different estrogen mimicking compounds in the environment. However, when it comes to progesterone, there are almost no progesterone mimicking things in the environment. The only place you're going to get progesterone after menopause is the adrenal glands, your stress glands. So you can see what begins to happen here. Not only do you have a natural estrogen excess and progesterone deficiency that occurs because of menopause, but then you have this environmental factor also feeding in to this dysfunction, all leading to higher amounts of estrogen and lower amounts of progesterone. And since progesterone is one of the major ways that you combat extra stress, stress becomes a major issue here, and so does adrenal support, supporting the adrenal glands with herbs and things like that that can make a difference to help balance this effect. One of the things that many people think is that this ratio of estrogen to progesterone is one of the reasons some women have such a hard time with hot flashes and things like that. So yes, the fact that estrogen has fallen and progesterone has fallen is going to potentially lead to some of these symptoms that you get at menopause, but perhaps this estrogen progesterone issue here ends up being even more of an issue. And this is why oftentimes women will substitute with progesterone-like herbs by themselves during the menopause period.